Assassin's Creed Valhalla is Ubisoft's newest iteration into the Assassin's Creed franchise, with this game being a personally unique experience for me. I have not played an Assassin's Creed game since Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and was looking forward to how the company has evolved the genre and built upon the central themes of the series. While Ubisoft has retained much of the amusement of being an assassin, it is clear that the game has drastically changed, both mechanically and fundamentally. With this in mind, not everything has shifted for the better, as this video essay will criticize and look at the numerous flaws that not only hold back the franchise, but also critically damage its player base. One of the most outstanding features of this game was its vast open world, being surprising to me since Assassin's Creed has historically restricted its story elements. Also, keep in mind that I have not played Origins or Odyssey, making this the first game to house such a fascinating RPG element. To me, the world was not just big, but immense in its sheer explorability, collectibles, environmental fidelity, and side quests. There is seemingly no end to the things you can build upon with your character and the relationships of this game, creating not just astonishment, but also an overwhelming atmosphere. Although this may seem beneficial to the experience of the game, you have to ask yourself, why has Ubisoft shifted from its traditional models to an open-world RPG? This is especially peculiar since fans of the series have never complained about the old style of gameplay or hinted at wanting an enormous environment. To me, the answer is quite simple. Ubisoft aimed to structure its world in a way that provides more empty areas to allocate components of a live service. For example, this would include gameplay elements that build upon microtransactions and other monetary avenues. Implications of this are already seen in the weapons and combat of the franchise, where certain elements can be upgraded and therefore open to service. As you can see within the video, I am placed in a settlement which is basically a new gameplay piece that acts as a home of sorts. As I walk to discuss with merchants in my settlement, I am able to garner contracts that are seemingly bound within a timing system. Story elements do not need time-specific events to be immersive, and even when they are, developers implement them in ways that fit with the narrative. For example, Sony's Spider-Man has time trials, but these side quests make sense as they test Spider-Man's capabilities while swinging. This outwardly random inclusion of time constraints tells me that Ubisoft is trying to immerse the player within live events and subsequently shift towards a live service. If you're still not convinced that Ubisoft is trying to exploit their players, look no further than the store built within the UI. Everything that is usable within the game is monetized, ranging from weapons to XP boosters to currency and even skins that do not formulate with the narrative. These transactions are not only greedy, but take advantage of the larger landscapes, incentivizing Assassin's Creed players to spend cash in order to save time. The grind within the game has gone so bad that you could easily spend hours or even days acquiring every single item. A collectible guide by PowerPix demonstrated that the total amount of collectibles in the game totaled a staggering 782 collectibles, which are all needed for 100% completion. It then comes to no one's surprise that the store also has solutions to these, with certain packs being able to reveal the location of artifacts and save the player time. Furthermore, some of these collectibles are key to progressing the story itself. Ubisoft introduced power scaling to the game, which made enemies more difficult or outright impossible to kill without the right gear. What makes this even more infuriating is that the strongest armor is locked to very difficult regions and leveling up is very slow. To mediate this, Ubisoft has XP boosters, which is unsettling and misplaced for a story game. Additionally, some of the most overpowered items can only be attained through this store, breaking both the achievement of the game but also a player necessity. Most of these items do not even fit within historical accuracy, which the game is known for. Instead, it parades around unconventional futuristic enhancements and disorganized fantasy components. The inclusion of these items do not correlate well within the game's narrative, and it feels as if there are multiple identities fighting for dominance. Valhalla especially is very prone to this concept, having a majority of its elements be tied to either magic rather than actual stealth-based operations. This does not only ruin the core values of the game, but also confuses players who might have bought the game with a set image in mind. Hence, while these cosmetics may just seem like some silly additions to the game, their role in the story is conflicting and harmful to the player experience as a whole. As you can see in this part, my hammer has lightning effects, which obviously do not fit in a real-world scenario. An article by Vicky Blake highlighted the excessive nature of these purchases, with there being as many armor sets in its premium store as it does in the entire base game. With this being said, these actions are also inherently predatory, as the monetary system derives from the most die-hard fans and other players who might be new to the franchise. Ubisoft knows that the majority of players that buy these collectibles are going to be in support of the Assassin branding and what they represent. So the company actively capitalizes on naivety and emotional responses to seize money from its players. For example, as mentioned previously, some of the best armor and weapons are only obtainable through online purchases, and there is nowhere within the actual game where you can acquire these assets. Obviously, the only players who would buy such commodities would be those who find aesthetic value or individuals who do not know how the game works. Ubisoft wants to intoxicate this experience within its large open world, hoping that the player is enchanted enough that they fork over money in their mesmerized stupor. This is not only greedy, but clear swindling of people who support Ubisoft the most. Additionally, this does not take into account the people who cannot afford to pay for these microtransactions, as since the system is now harder, more disadvantaged players are now stuck in disadvantaged environments. It does not help that the main quests are extremely long, with my total runtime of the game averaging around 60 to 70 hours. This means that players are going to have to suffer throughout the entire game if they do not grind, find the best weapons, or spend even more money. These avenues are clearly pay-to-win systems, and even though it is a single-player game, I hope that we can realize the damage that it is indirectly causing to the players themselves. All these factors are presented in contrast to Ubisoft's previous titles, which house more player-driven elements. You could argue that these were still microtransactions, and this means exploitation. But I beg to differ, as rather than monetizing every single aspect of the world, previous installments simply gave the player options. For example, Syndicate only opted for a currency model rather than in-game purchases. I felt that this offered only possibilities, and nowhere in my playthrough did I feel obligated to spend money. Moreover, a lot of the cosmetics are story-driven, allowing the player to feel satisfactory within the items they have attained. We can already see how player dissatisfaction has increased, with Ubisoft branching the series into two main categories, one being an RPG and the other following the traditional small open world. Individuals who play these series are starting to realize the lack of actual meaning behind the game, and resisting against mundane installments. We do not know where Ubisoft will go from here, but the presence of divergent game titles speak volumes for the public opinion of the game. For example, a Reddit thread by user Zuazer showcased how people have spent hundreds of dollars on the collector's edition but have received little to no rewards. This is all the while Ubisoft keeps adding more and more to the online store, blatantly exhibiting their establishment of money over the player base that sustains their games. If you go even further down into the thread, you can see multiple complaints about the lack of bug fixes and the feeling of betrayal because a lot of these people already paid $60 for the base game. Overall, Ubisoft's new games seem to prioritize the ability to implement more cash-grabbing methods rather than player experience. Therefore, it is clear that these games are not large or roguelike to satisfy players, but rather build upon these systems for Ubisoft's own gain. In the end, this just ruins the immersion that made players fall in love with the franchise, and without the intervention of these flaws, Ubisoft would destroy its reputation.